White oppressive forces have co-opted the word woke and deliberately attached it onto movements that are unpopular within the Black communities. In doing so, they've turned the word woke into a negative connotation in the minds of many Black people. Before the word woke was co-opted by white oppressive forces, it was used within the Black communities during our social justice campaigns to refer to an awareness of inequalities, with some urging others to stay woke. Now, many of us are now speaking out against the word woke. The gullible, naive, and sheep-minded among us are always the easiest victims of the white oppressors' mass manipulation propaganda schemes that are designed to keep us thinking in ways that are against our own interests and that instead serve the interests of our oppressors. The African slaves of the 21st century are those who don't critically think, therefore never notices their mental chains. Therefore, those of us who can see our mental chains have an inherent duty to teach those of us who do not see them. Therefore, I'm going to keep telling the truth that is needed to expel the lies and deceptions we have been force-fed for generations by the white society. We must teach the truth whether it fills the room or clears it out. We must post the truth whether we're hated for it, berated for it, blocked for it, or are unfriended for it. We must teach the truth regardless of who it offends. Because we are called to awaken the sleeping Black sheep, not to appease the mentally enslaved goats that now function as wardens of their own mental prisons. A speaker of truth has no friends, and those who know the truth must teach. These are African proverbs. The absolute truth is that Black people will never liberate ourselves believing in a biblical fairy tale and a silly slave syndrome myth. When Black people formulates our liberation based upon easily proven works of fiction, we are in fact making fools of ourselves. The truth of our plighted condition does not require us to believe in the unseen and the supernatural. It's clear to see, just open your eyes. The truth of our plighted condition are directly connected to our oppressors' monopoly over the input of information and media contents that are being fed into our minds. People's behaviors aligns with the contents that they repeatedly receive, and the white oppressors keeps feeding us mental enslaving contents that keeps us thinking and behaving in ways that are beneficial to themselves. Case, point, and proof. The reason why many Black people now reveres our oppressors, in spite of such a brutally horrific history of oppression, has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. The true hidden reason is because we were socialized to revere our oppressors. Socialized is when the oppressors exploits their monopoly over the input of contents that are repetitively fed into the collective minds of the oppressed, to manipulate the oppressed to think and behave in ways that are beneficial to the oppressors. The socializing of the oppressed is how those empires that have been brutally oppressive throughout history prevents the oppressed from engaging in acts of massive unified retribution against the oppressors. The truth of the matter is that virtually all of the contents that are being systematically fed into our minds by the white society contains propaganda that subliminally socializes us to think in ways that are beneficial to the white society. Case, point, and proof. Within our schools, we're miseducated to believe that our enslaved ancestors were sold off to the invaders. Therefore, this shifts the culpability of the slave trade more greatly upon Africans than the white invaders. It's why many of us now blame the enslavement of our ancestors on our fellow Africans more than we do the white people. Within the media, we're only shown those poorest parts of Africa, while we're never shown the beautiful parts of Africa that are flourishing. They also miseducate us to believe that before the white society invaded Africa, that our ancestors were illiterate and uncivilized savages. This miseducation, combined with the media's negative distorted depiction of Africa, makes millions of us perceive that the enslavement of our ancestors as having been more of a rescue mission that delivered us away from the primitive backwoodsness of Africa. It's the true reason why millions of us now literally feel grateful that our ancestors were enslaved. Millions of African Americans now openly says that they're happy that slavery happened because they've been made to perceive the enslavement of our ancestors as having been more of a rescue mission. We literally perceive ourselves as being the lucky ones to have been taken away from the terrible place of Africa. Millions now literally feel that we're the lucky ones. These black people are clueless of the fact that their minds have been socialized by fraudulent propaganda to think in ways that are beneficial to the white society. Most of the contents that we receive from the white society are filled with fraudulent propaganda that socializes us to think and behave in ways that are beneficial to the white society. It's also embedded even within the movies and television shows that we watch while we think we're just being entertained. Those movies and TV shows that constantly depicts Caucasians as being saviors and heroes righting all wrongs are the true reasons why many of us now favorably perceive them in spite of such a brutally horrific history to the contrary. We are perceiving them based upon the media programming. And those those fraudulent news report that constantly tells us that we're killing each other at the highest rate, they're deliberately designed to demoralize us, divide us, create black self-loathing, and to make us fear each other because they manipulate us to perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies. This shifts our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirects it against ourselves. It's the true reason why millions of us are now insisting that we're now our worst enemies. Through all of these noted actions, black people have been socialized to think and behave in ways that are beneficial to the white society. It's how the white society protects itself from massive unified black retribution. It's the absolute truth that unfortunately far too many black people have been psychologically blinded from seeing. When it has been done gradually, people can be made to believe things that literally insults their own intelligence. Also, they can be made to believe things that go against their own nature and against their own self-interest. We are being manipulated to think in ways that benefit the white society through their monopoly over information that we receive. The collective minds of large targeted populations are quite easy to manipulate when what is done gradually and when people are unaware of what's being done to them. Once minds have been confused, manipulation becomes simple. The mind will even ignore common sense and rationality falls away, even overlooking hypocrisy and deception. There are 4 ways to effectively manipulate the human brain: by what we're taught, by what we see, by what we hear, and through repetition. Because the white society controls the education we're taught, the media images that we see, and the societal narratives that we repetitively hear, these combined factors allows them to socialize our minds to think and behave in ways that serves the white society. It's the truth of our plight and condition. While black people studied our Bibles, believing that it contained the true words of God that would protect us, white oppressive forces studied instead the science of how to hijack the group minds of targeted population through their monopoly over information. They used that gained knowledge to create an elaborate prison for the minds of black people. And the prison for the mind is the most difficult prison to escape. Nonetheless, we must never underestimate the power of planting seeds of truth into fertile minds. I mean, this isn't hard to figure out. Many black people now blame slavery more on Africans. Many black people perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies. Many black people now revere the white society. Many black people feel happy about slavery. Look at our mindset. Our minds have been made to think in ways that benefits the white society. And it's not because of silly slave syndrome. It's because through the white society's monopoly over information that are fed into our minds, they manipulate us to think in ways that benefits the white society. We must function based on what is true. Because if our understandings remain flawed, then all of our liberating strategies that stem from them will be flawed. Once we understand what's happening, we'll be able to protect our minds. When we're watching the media, when we're being educated, we understand that there are propaganda embedded in there. White social scientists describe this as merely instilling a value system into the collective minds of the black population that makes us adhere to white dominance over our lives. It's how social scientists protects the white society from massive black retribution, considering how long they've been brutalizing us. We must function based on what is true. There are a lot of propagandists fitting idiotic ideologies into our community. They want to keep our minds dumbed down and distracted from this truth. Brothers and sisters, it's time to wake up. One love and peace.